Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Myers, and I'm here to talk about the methods I use to create a fully automated consort diagram macro. Consort diagrams are a very tedious type of diagram to make, but they're often required for any sort of publication in clinical statistics or oncology papers. They require a lot of manual setup, a lot of manual alignment, entering the numbers, calculating the numbers, etc. I've seen other people that have programmed them before, but I've never seen one that was really fully automated. And so I'm here today to share with you the methods that I use to fully automate my macro. So contents of the talk today are what are a consort diagram, short description of my macro, and a little demonstration of what it can do. Then I'm going to focus on how I actually automate behind the scenes, starting with the graphic setup, automation methods I use to do all the calculations, as well as a few final steps to get the plot or the data set ready to plot. So first of all, what is a consort diagram? Consort diagram is essentially a flow chart that is a visual depiction of what goes on in the trial itself. There are nodes of the consort which show the key events, such as, in this case, registration, randomization to one of two arms, starting and ending treatment. It's very easy to see how many patients flow from the start to the end, as well as where they go off and for what reasons. So an introduction to the macro, it fully automates making a consort diagram with the user input data, calculates the numbers, creates and fills the text boxes, aligns the text boxes, and draws all the connecting lines. It has multiple options for customizing the font size and color, text box outline and colors, tweaking the alignment and adding notation. Also outputs multiple image types and works well with ODS output. There's only 3 required inputs: the dataset name, an ID variable for a unique patient identifier. You can only have 1 row per patient in the input dataset. A node is 1 or more variables that represent a node of the consort. These variables serve 2 purposes. They act like a logical operator to show missing or non-missing for that node, and they also contain the value that will be printed into the text box. The order these variables are listed left to right will be how they are printed top to bottom in the consort. A couple other key options are split, which are variables that will make the consort paths branch off or split. You can have 1 split variable for every node that you have. The values of the split variables will be used in the text boxes, and they'll be added as another row below the node that you list them at. Off reason, there can be 1 or more variables specified per node containing the reason the patient went off treatment. The label of these variables is used as the header for the text box, along with the total count of that text box, and then the value of the variable is then used in that bulleted list, along with the count for each specific reason in that text box. The example data set that I make in the paper, it's a completely made up set of data. We have an ID variable for patient ID, treatment arm, a couple demographic variables, a couple off treatment variables for different time points of the trial, and then about 8 different nodes for key events of the trial. It's included registration, randomization, starting treatment, completing the neoadjuvant chemo, RT, which only exists in 1 arm, surgery, adjuvant chemo, and then completing all therapy. We can see patient 3 here has a missing in comp, which means they did not complete all therapy according to the macro, and then they have a withdrawal reason as the reason why. If you make a basic example using just the first 4 nodes and the ID variable, we get this nice little succinct flow chart. If we add in the split variable, we get that branching path at randomization, and we add in those 2 different off-treatment variables where the first one applies to the first node, second one will apply to all the following nodes. And here's an example adding the second one at the 3rd node. So we have a second split variable, sex here at the 3rd node, which will again split it off. You can do this as many times as you want, as long as you have the space for it. A quick little live demo. I have a few different consorts I have here just to show off some of the other functionality really quick of the macro. They all run rather quickly. This one is just showing that you can control where the text boxes for the off-treatment reasons go. They can either pop to the outside, all go left, all go right. You can add little adjusting numbers if the macro puts these too close to these boxes, you can add a little tweak number that will push them to the left or to the right. You can add frequency variables into nodes as well. So in this case, we have sex in these boxes. That might be a stratification factor that you want to show as balance between the arms. The next example, I have different color options showing. I have a couple different end summary variables. So if you get to your analysis set and you want to show off what your outcome variable is, such as tumor response, you can list as many endpoint summary variables as you want, and it'll list the frequency of them for each branching arm you have. This example also shows that while you can branch arms, you can also collapse them back in and remerge them, and potentially split them off again if you need to. This example is just showing what happens with 3 split variables. I turned off the off-treatment boxes just to keep it from being too cluttered. As long as you have the horizontal space, you can have as many split variables as you want. The last example has some annotation added to the graph. I turned on X and Y axes because these are manually added in the macro call at specific coordinates. And I'm just showing you can turn those on to make it easier to figure out which coordinates you want to put those at. You can control the colors of the background and the fonts and the borders separately. You can have them run horizontally or vertically. You can add horizontal lines at certain parts of the graph, and you can also force these text boxes to be wider if you want them to cover more of a space for each section of the plot. So setting up the graphics, creating the text box is the most important part, and the SGPlot procedures text statement works really well for that. The backfill and the outline options allow you to create that opaque bordered text box that we need. Split justify allows you to justify left, center, or right. Split care and split policy allow you to control where you want line breaks. Those are the options that I use in order to create those bulleted lists within the same text box. The best feature that I see is that the text box is automatically sized by SGPlot to match the text. Previously, I've seen others have to draw a rectangle manually by guessing where the text is going to be, or printing the text and then going back and trying to add the border on later. Position allows user to specify an anchor point for the box to sit at certain coordinates. I found the position variable to kind of be a little backwards in my head. So for example, if you say position equals bottom, the anchor point for the text box is actually on the top and the text goes to the bottom. I would kind of picture it in my mind to be the reverse of that. The only required variables are X, Y, and text. Creating the connecting lines is done with series statements. I use 2 different series statements, one with and one without arrowheads. I use unique ID variables for each line segment, and I use the group option so I don't have any of my lines actually connecting to each other. I just found it was easier to control just by having the start and end points for every line separate. And then I have X and Y variables just for the coordinates of each line. The graph space is set up to be from 0 to 100 on both axes. The columns and rows are then able to be allocated a percentage of space, which just seems to flow easier. All graph borders, axes, and labels are turned off just to make that nice clean look, and we don't actually need any of those for the consort. So for automating, there are 4 primary data items that I need to automate. I need to determine the unique patient paths through the trial. I need to derive the text and counts for each text box, determine the parent-child links between the text boxes, and then determine the XY coordinates of each text box so I can then determine where the text boxes go, as well as connect them with the lines. To get the patient paths, I take what I start with on the input data set. So this example, just looking at patient 19. They go through registration, randomization, starting treatment, but then they go off before neoadjuvant. And I kind of transpose that so that each one of those values gets turned into this label column. Each step, each node gets its own unique identifier, where the first number represents the row that it's in. The second number represents which combination of split variables it's currently at. So you can see here with the split variable, there is none. That's the first unique combination, so it gets number 1. Second unique combination is when we actually get a value in split 1, so that gets the number 2. there's a couple extra rows that get added in here. So when we encounter our first split variable, we add in another row to get that the value of the actual split variable into the consort, like when we saw the two arms branch off. And then when the patient goes off treatment before and doesn't actually get to the end of the consort, we add in an extra row for that so that the off treatment box can branch off. The label grabs the label of that variable, and we hang on to the off reason to be used in a query. I have some other flag variables that I just use the subset a few queries down the road here. The patient paths then are outlined into a data set with each unique full path available. So we have 8 rows in this consort, and we can see the first 2 steps are the same for both, which makes sense. And then they branch off into having the numbers 2 and 3 on the end, which represent going down the 2 different paths. I do the same thing with the patients that go off treatment as well. Calculating the patient counts. I use a bunch of SQL queries to do this because I find that's the easiest way to aggregate the data. I have a few sorting variables in my data set. Phase is the current phase of the consort, meaning how many split variables have occurred. Label is just the text value node we've seen. I'll give different positions to different text boxes depending on where they are. The off treatment boxes get left and right. The other boxes get bottom. I use count distinct to get the counts, and then I just concatenate that with the label. I like having the parenthesis n equals parenthesis syntax with mine, but that can be easily changed for others with a different preference. When I put all those queries together, I wind up with this data set. So I have all the information that I had before. I added in the other rows for the off treatment reasons. It's really easy to picture what the text boxes are going to look at when looking at this data set. I get my labels with my numbers. I still have some ordering variables available, and I have all the positions for the text boxes. Currently, these are all in separate rows, and I will have to collapse them down, and I'll show that in another slide. The parent-child links between the text boxes. If I go back to the data set that had all the unique paths, I can walk through those with an array and easily grab the nodes that appear before and after the current node. Again, the row is just going to be the first number of the node that it's currently in, so it's pretty easy to grab those. And the row length will again just be the first number of the node that it connects to going backwards. I set up a few variables with these so I can use them in arrays later in order to grab the attributes of a certain text box. I can also use these connect forward, connect backward in order to merge in information from other text boxes. Determining the XY coordinates of each text box. The X coordinates are the most difficult ones to actually calculate. You have to properly space them all, and as you can imagine, when you have different branching paths that might be unbalanced, maybe there's 2 paths on one side, 3 on the other, it's difficult to get the spacing correct. Y coordinates are the most straightforward with 2 different methods that I've found. You can either allocate enough space to each row of the consort and center them within that row, or you can give them each a proportionate space depending on how many lines of text that they have and center in that proportion space. That's useful if you have a large number of maybe single row boxes mixed in with a bunch of off treatment boxes that might have 5 or more rows or reasons in there. You can then allocate space a little bit better to those. To get the X coordinates, I came up with this system. So for each phase or split that happens in the plot, I look at how many paths are in there and allocate an equal space for them. So in the first row here, there's only 1 path, so I give it 100% of the space and put the line in the middle. The second row, there's 2, so I give each one 50%. I put the line in the middle of that 50%, so 25, 75. The last row of this example, there's 5 paths, so I give them each 20% of the graph space and center them. The next step, we're going to assume that all the final paths are where they're going to wind up, and we start working our way up the consort. So in the second row here, I look at this node and look at what it connects to, find these 2 points, and then I just center them between those 2 points. Do the same thing on the other side. The final step, I go up to this row here, look at the 2 points it connects to, the 2 new points I've calculated, and then center it between those points. I found that this method works for pretty much any set of paths that I have. Some final steps. So what's left, we have to collapse our text values into one row. I concatenate all the split character, or concatenate with the split character to act as a delimiter or the line break within the text box. The reason why I do this, because the text block will not automatically combine text items that are plotted in the same coordinates automatically. They'll actually just stack on top of each other. So I have to do this prior to plotting. I also have to output the X and Y values for all the connecting lines. Collapsing the text down is pretty straightforward using first dot, last dot, and the retained text variable. So I sort by the coordinates, and then I have this temp text variable, which I will then concatenate all of the actual text variables into using cat x, along with the line break symbol that I've chosen for the macro. And then I just output at the last value of the coordinates. And we can see the example here, where now instead of having multiple rows for all the off-treatment reasons, I have my little line break symbol along with each reason. So now I have a data set where I have my coordinates. I have one row per node with the final text value that I want. So now I just need to make the lines that connect everything. I start by making a one-row data set that has all the XY coordinates and positions of each text box. I use an array where I just contain all those values down to the last row of the data set and output. I then merge that one-row data set into every row of the previous data set so that every single node has access to all the metadata of all the other nodes. I can then use my row and column indexes as well as indexes for the forward and backwards linking nodes in order to grab any data that I need for finding the coordinates to connect the lines. Linking the lines when the text boxes are in the same column is the most straightforward one. It's just the XY coordinate of the previous text box along with the XY coordinate of the current text box, which are, like I said, are easy to find. The next one is a little trickier. The XY coordinates of the origin, the red circle here, is just the X coordinate of either the previous text box or the following text box as well. And then the Y-axis is the midpoint between them. The finishing coordinate is the X coordinate of this current text box, and then again, Y point is the median between in the middle between these. The trouble with this is the midpoint is calculated from the bottom of the previous text box to the top of the current one. And the more lines you have here, the less space you have. And if you only go between this anchor point and this anchor point, the more off this line is going to be. So what I do is I have an adjustable parameter called multi-line adjust that I give space for each line of text in a text box. I can adjust it when the font sizes go up and down, and that gives me what I call a guess bottom to the text box here. I can then just do the simple math of finding the midpoint between these 2 points in order to properly line up the text box in the middle. Linking text boxes that are not in the same column, I just have to make 3 lines. So again, I find the midpoint here, I find the guess bottom of this box, I go from the guess bottom down to that midpoint, make a second line that goes the horizontal space between these two, and then I make one other line that goes down. Some people might prefer just to have a straight line that goes from here to here. Diagonally, I've kind of found that I like the rectangular look a little bit better. This is a snapshot of what the dataset looks like with these line coordinates entered. I have 2 separate XY pairs here. This pair is for the lines with arrowheads on them. Second set is for the lines without arrowheads. I have a unique ID for each coordinate pair of these lines. And we can see the different instances that happen, such as the off-treatment line here, as well as when we have that split, we wind up having 3 sets of lines that I mentioned before. I also wanted to mention that I have 3 X variables for my text boxes, technically 4. This one doesn't get used as much. This stands for X bottom, X right, X left. That's because the text boxes themselves, they have an option with the position option to have that position value be determined by a variable. But if you do that and you split justify at the same time, it gives you the wrong position. It just seems to be a glitch. And so I just make 3 different text statements with the 3 different positions that I need. Finally, to get superscripts, they only work in the text plots when they apply as a numeric format to a variable. So I get around this by making a numeric value, which is just the row of the data set. I name that start. I then use that start along with label with an approx format in order to make the format, which is just that text value, to be applied to the start variable. And then I plot my text with the start variable instead and just apply the format. Then if I have any Unicode or superscripts, which are very common in consorts because you'll have footnotes, they will show up properly in the text boxes. So in conclusion, these methods can be used outside of a macro to programmatically create a consort. There are many different preferences and styles of consort depending on the journal and the employer. So people can try to design their own to fit their needs. The consort macro itself is available to be downloaded and potentially modified if others want to use it. Thank you for listening. I can be reached at either of these emails. The first is my work email, and the second is my personal email. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions about the macro or just my process in doing this in general. And thanks again for listening.